Here.
Yeah, I was talking about here. Yeah.
Then what happened?
Hi, Nicole. Welcome. Can we do just a quick audio check for you? Nicole? Nope, you're still muted. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Nicole. Nope, we still can't hear you.
I'm not Nicole. I got to get off this. I don't know how I got on.
Oh, okay. All right.
Nicole. So
okay.
let me go and I'll.
Okay.
Shoot. How do I get it? Okay. Nope.
Shit. Let's do this. Stop. Reset. Start. Go.
Welcome to the Flint Community Webinar, your community resource. We are excited to be back again with you. We have such wonderful expertise on the webinar this month. We are going to talk a little bit about the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health Community Co-Governance Council. And then we're going to get into Lyme disease, what you need to know to prevent Lyme disease, what the symptoms are, and what we should be thinking about in terms of treatment. So we're going to get started and get right into the Community Co-Governance Council. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is one of the things that I think makes Flint, our relationship with MSU, the College of Human Medicine, and the Department of Public Health, and our community work so important. We are one of the only departments that is in community with community. We make decisions with community, and we have the opportunity to talk a little bit about that with some wonderful, what I'll call Flint celebrities. We've got Dr. Kent Key, we've got Artina Carter, we've got Ella Green Mountain. We've got some great people to talk to you about the history of this and how it works. So I'm going to let that whole team take it away.
So hello, everyone, and thank you all for having us here to talk about the Community Co-Governance Council. We're briefly going to just talk about the history and the origin of the council, the development of an actual co-governance work group that developed the Community Co-Governance Council and its model, and the transformative model that we are really excited to say is currently under review, and we actually have been able to share it in some national spaces, and a lot of institutions across the country are very interested in this model and in adapting it to really expand community engagement in their institution. Next slide, please. So this work of developing a community co-governance group came from the real rooted community engaged approach that we have here at MSU Flint. When MSU Flint started, it was really around engaging community members to find out what a community would want in the medical school if the medical school was to come here. And we're happy to say that it was a true community engaged process. Thousands of surveys were sent out, and those survey questions were co-developed with Flint community leadership as well as MSU leadership. And the results of those surveys really highlighted the priorities that would be the focus of the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health here in MSU Flint. And so in the spirit of that engagement, we instituted a community engagement group meeting that would happen every fourth Monday. And this group meeting was really designed to be an ongoing engagement platform so that community could come, talk about what's trending, what are the emergent issues, the emergent health and social issues and medical issues that are in the community, as well as to meet and to learn what our researchers and our medical professionals and our public health students were working on as it relates to health, with the hope of creating alignment and synergy around shared causes and shared interests. And as a result of that, the Community Co-Governance Council, this idea of having this community, a co-governance structure was birthed. And that started as a community co-governance work group. And from that, we did a lot of work that you'll hear a little bit more about in detail. But what we did was we took community engagement outside of the traditional vein, and we have really taken community engagement to a place that most institutions and most academic institutions have not. And we'll talk about that in some of the slides that we have worked on. And then some of the future community engagement that we see is institutional involvement that directs and impacts the work that we do. We're going to discuss some of that. And then also what the lack of engagement with people who are most impacted, what does that look like, right? How does that manifest in the ongoing disparities and inequities that we see throughout our community? So we'll talk a little bit about a lot of this, and it's some exciting work. Next slide. So in the probably about 4 decades ago, 30 to 40 years ago, you really start hearing more around community participatory research. Some people called it participatory action research, or PAR. Others are more familiar with community-based participatory research, CBPR. But there were these action-engaged forms of research that were emerging that were totally different from the traditional research, right? Where the communities that are being researched were never a part of the research process or the research cycle until it was time to extract data from them. But what we saw over time as these newer evolved approaches to research began to really take precedent, there was a lot of emphasis on creating relationships between the community and the researcher, right? Making sure that there was shared trust and, shared decision-making, transparency, mutual benefits for both sides, and bidirectional learning. There was a lot of emphasis. So a community would just really may adore an Artina Carter who maybe was representing a university as a researcher, or an Eileen Hayes who was representing the engaging with the community as a researcher, and they trusted them, right? But what happens often in academic institutions? Oftentimes people leave, they get offered tenured other places or promotion other places. And so what we saw was, for decades, we were building these real strong bonds with communities and the researchers that were at the institutions, but we realized that there was something missing. Next slide. There was no relationship between the community and the institution. And so the researcher had this kind of bi-directional identity with both community and institution. But when the researcher left, there was no relationship with the institution. And it's often taxing, and I've heard several community members say, you know, as soon as we get a researcher here that understands us and knows us and we build trust, and whoop, they're gone. We got to start all over again, building trust. And it takes time, and it takes a lot of energy and commitment. And so what we saw was we needed to really focus on the problem. And the problem was the same energy that was used to build relationship between the community and the researcher needed to also be built and put in place to build the relationship between the community and the institution. Next slide. And so that's kind of where we landed to where we are now. We're working here at Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health to not only build the relationships between our researchers and community, but the institution. Because what we posit is that true, authentic community engagement has to go beyond the life cycle of a funded grant, a funded study, or a funded initiative. But we have to use and build those same principles of trust and respect and bi-directional learning, etc., with our institution. And so what happened was that community engagement group launched a subgroup known as the Community Governance Work Group. And that work group worked together for over a year, identifying what would engagement between community and the institution look like. And where we landed was around community co-governance within the institution. And so what we landed on was building this infrastructure where community members were embedded at decision-making communities within our department, not just for a funded initiative or for a funded study, but they sit at committees within our department and will be a part of the decision-making process, bringing community voice, bringing community perspective, and bringing community values to these discussions that are in the department. And how did we do that? We had to literally write the committee into the bylaws. We had to create bylaw language that, one, identified the Community Co-Governance Council as an official committee of our department, but also what the function of the committee would be and how it would engage with committees, department committees, and how community voice would be valued at those tables. And so it took a lot of work. One, we searched the literature to see if there was something like this in existence, because why invent a wheel if one is already invented? We couldn't find one. And so it was a lot of work really revolutionizing what community engagement means between community and academic institutions, and really going beyond, again, the restrictions and confines of a funded initiative or study. Next slide. In doing that, we created a community academic co-governance model. And this model is built on the equity indicators and the contextual factors from the continuum of community engagement and research. And those indicators are power and control, ownership, decision-making, responsibility, influence, resource sharing, and mutual benefit. And also history, trust, relationship building, respect, and transparency. Those are core. Those are foundational to any relationship. But our C3, where at the time our co-governance work group members also identified that there had to be both buy-in, time, and commitment from the community as well as the institution. One of our members, I remember in one of the earlier meetings, they didn't want to necessarily just hear from those that were tasked from the institution side running. They wanted to hear from the top of our department. Are you all really committed to doing this? Right? Is there institutional support? Because we don't want to spend all this time creating something, and then as soon as another person is put in leadership, it's gone, right? Some of the pillars that we saw that were important are, you see in the middle, those 9 pillars. Cultural competency. What are the policy implications of having co-governance? What about mutual accountability and equitable compensation? Those are just some of them that were very important that we wanted to underscore. But then that top arrow, it shows that there needs to be individual impact and sustainability for both community and the institution, but there's that space of shared impact and shared sustainability. And what's really revolutionizing community engaged research and community engagement broadly with this model is that other institutions who we thought were light years, ahead doing this work are literally flabbergasted at what MSU is creating and wanting to replicate it and duplicate it across the country. And again, when we did our lit review to see what was already out there, there was nothing like this published. And so we're happy to say that this model is currently under review with Progress in Community Partnerships Journal. And we hope to have some tangible articles that will be able to be disseminated electronically to those of you who are viewing this presentation today. Next slide. So with that, we're going to give an update on the CEG meetings, the current C3 membership and how we got that membership. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other initial activities that we did, including our leadership structure, etc. So I'll pass it over to Artina Carter.
Thank you, Dr. Key. So I want to talk a little bit about the CEG, our community engagement group. That is a group, that group serves as like the parent group for all these other groups. So from that group spun the Community Social Determinants of Health Solutions Lab and also the C3. So how that worked was during one of the SEG meetings, there was a conversation had about this co-governance process. So people were selected from that group, from the SEG and from the SDOH group to represent and work on that work group. And so many of us on that work group, we worked for many, many months to pull together a lot of different things. We worked on creating bylaws. We worked on creating the process for nominations and voting. We worked on all these many processes. When we got to the point of voting, it was very important for the work group and we were very intentional about how much influence our beloved staff from MSU had, right? So they were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to nominate. They totally stayed out of that process, and it was intentional. We love them, we trust them, but we really wanted to make sure that the community was represented in this particular space. And so the nominations came from the work group. They went back to the SEG. The SEG had to agree with those nominations, and then there was a vote in the SEG. No MSU staff could vote. It was only community votes. And so what happened was you ended up with me and Ella and Eileen. I am the immediate past president. That's a funny story, but that's okay. And then we have Ella, who is the sitting president, and we have Eileen, who is it's not vice chair,
Incoming president.
Incoming president. There it is. Thank you. That structure, it also was created in that work group. And there was a lot of time, a lot of intentionality put into a lot of those things. So currently our C3 membership is 11 people strong. And they are compensated through the Department of Public Health. Our first meeting was on September 19th of 2025. And since that first meeting, we have been very, very active in a lot of different ways. So we have established, our leadership structure. We have our leadership in place. We are working to determine which committees people are going to serve on and who's going to serve on those committees. And we're also reporting on activities during the community engagement meetings. So we have to take what we do back to the SEG because, again, that is our parent group. So with that, we will turn this over to
next slide.
Again. Next slide, please.
So I mentioned that the C3 model is already a manuscript that's under review. So we are anticipating being able to share that with you all broadly very soon, and that the C3 model also was submitted as an APHA, American Public Health Association abstract. It was submitted last month, end of last month, and we hope to get a decision in June that we were selected, and then we'll be taking the C3 leadership to APHA to really talk about the work of the C3 and the model itself. Artina's going to then speak about the adjunct faculty process. This is the work to date that the C3 is working on. Ms. Eileen Hayes will talk about onboarding processes, and then Ella will really give an overview of the C3 and the national impact that we have, and then we'll come back with some next steps.
All right, so for the adjunct faculty appointments, this was a very interesting thing. So even when we first, before C3, when we first started, when the SEG happened and SDOH happened, we started talking about, and I know I was really one of those people who were like, hey, we want access to resources, not just, come to the meeting, we find, we're working with everybody and be involved in research. We want access to resources all the time. I didn't know how that was going to happen, and MSU really, really stepped up. They came back with this adjunct faculty appointment process or opportunity, wherein there will be several members of the C3 who would be listed as adjunct faculty. They would have access to all the things adjunct faculty have at MSU, and they would, and they would be able to have that opportunity, which was way beyond where we thought we would ever go, which is fantastic. So what we did as the C3 is we created a work group, and that work group has begun working on applications and processes. Now we're using MSU's applications, but we have to be able to screen the folks on C3 to get them through the application process. We have a lot of support for this process, but right now we have a screening mechanism. They have a kind of a general application that you have to go through before you get to the main application. And then there's a voting process. So those things have been created. They're going through review through the committee, and they should be completed soon. Eileen?
Right. So thank you, Artina. One of the things that's been great about this whole process with Michigan State is that there have always been different ways that community has been involved at some level on some of the different committees. But now through this process, there's a way for community to have a coordinated way to be involved in a number of the committees. And what we're looking at is looking at all the committees in the public health area, and having a very coordinated way of being able to look at each of the committees and what the tasks are, who the chairs are, what the mission of each of those committees are, and having the community member being able to see that and to see how those skills match up with their particular competencies, and if that is a way, if there's a particular match, and they can kind of see how they can be structured, and that's a way to be able to match up their skill competency with how they want to be able to volunteer with being able to join their skill set with being onboarded to a particular way to joining a committee. So that whole onboarding process is something that we're looking at making very easy for a community member to become a part of. So that's the process that we've been working on simplifying for community members. So look forward to seeing that being a fully functional way of having access to as we move forward in this process.
And I just like to interject, and Eileen is really working on two processes. Right now, that's the process we're focusing on, but we're creating processes to onboard as new C3 members come on, onboarding them to the C3, but then onboarding the C3 members to the committees in the department that they will serve. And so again, hats off to Eileen and her team who are working on this, because again, we're building the plane as we fly. And so we're creating the template that we know will be impactful and effective. And I'm going to invite the current president of the C3 to really, and I'm positioning her in a way because for some of you that may know, Ella is one of the past presidents of the American Public Health Association. And in her time of being past president, even immediate past president, she has been all over the nation working with institutions and organizations around building effective public, relationships to advance public health. And she really will be able to give us that national perspective and really comparing that to the work that she's seeing on the ground here in Flint. Ella, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kent. So earlier, Dr. Key mentioned the impact that MSU is having in changing the game on community engaged research. I want to take a moment to highlight and celebrate some of the additional accomplishments by recognizing the phenomenal work that has been done in the city of Flint, but specifically by the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health, College of Human Medicine at the University of Michigan, at the Michigan State University Flint campus. Over the years, and in my personal public health journey, I have witnessed a shift in community engaged research from a very strong, authentic, relationship oriented partnership and collaboration between local community partners and their individual academic partners to this very intentional and empowering space where the partnerships and collaborations are now taking place at the institutional level. And as Dr. Key mentioned earlier, that's something that didn't happen in the past, and are not indicative of the timeline of an individual study or program. The Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health in Flint has expanded the concept of community engagement beyond the scope of the research cycle. As early as 2011, MSU and the leadership team met with Flint area leaders to co-create and co-design the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health. Community members set the research and health priorities for medical school and served on search committees to recruit gifted and talented faculty to Flint and to the Flint campus. And in 2025, the Community Co-Governance Council was created and adopted by the Charles Stewart Mott Department of Public Health. The C3 was incorporated in the department's bylaws, which is unheard of across the nation, and institutionalized as an official committee of the department. It opened the door and provided a platform to have community partners presented at various decision-making tables and within the department, thus acknowledging that the community is not an external entity, which is the way we function for years, and confirming that the community voice and perspective is included in the internal structure of the department. Please know that this groundbreaking effort at MSU is the first university to engage community in this fashion, not as a token, but as a co-collaborator of governance and creations at the university. I can say assuredly that, and Dr. Key mentioned this, that many institutions across the country are interested in this process. And I don't even know if it was something that was thought about earlier, because many of us, and in my personal journey, I can remember being at the table and having my academic partners share situations where it's something that they personally would want to do, but it's not something that they had authority to do, that had to go, before the institution. So this is groundbreaking, and we need to take a moment to celebrate it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Key, for any final comments.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Edwards Johnson.
I think we should take a moment to celebrate it. I appreciate so much the words that you just described. I think it is so true that it is a point of pride for, I think, many of us who had the opportunity to be adjacent to this. The sort of seriousness with which we've approached an endeavor to make sure we are underscoring the partnerships that we have, the work of our community. And I appreciated the sentiment of not just a token, right? It is not a superficial relationship. It is something that is at the core of what we do, and is game changing. And it's something that we are all proud to be a part of. So thank you for being here, to make sure that people had some awareness of the wonderful work you are all doing, and the importance of, when we talk about MSU Flint, we are talking about the community, and how much you are a part of the process of the new people we bring in. And I think that's the important piece, right? You said it, and I want to make sure people hear it. This is community on decision-making committees around who we are bringing to work here, which means that new faculty are vetted by community and have to be people who are engaged in and understanding and caring of community if they are going to be a part of the work that MSU Flint does. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so glad to be in community with all of you. All right. I hate to shift from that topic, because like we could have this conversation and I could talk to these wonderful people all day. But I am excited to have a conversation that allows our community to understand something that has become more of an issue in Michigan, and something that we need to think about and make sure that community has some awareness of. So I want to say, around last year, we were having a discussion with the health department about Lyme disease, and sort of what was not a usual occurrence in our area in Michigan, but what was becoming a little bit of a spread towards the Midwest, and something that we needed to understand more in terms of trends and why. And a shout out to Dr. Jean Tsao for talking to us a little bit about what is Lyme disease, what are the symptoms, what can we do to prevent it, and what we need to be thinking about in Flint. And so our goal on the webinar, and in our work to be in community with folks in Flint, is to make sure that we bring you the resources that are available. So thank you so much for talking to us about Lyme disease and what we can think about in terms of prevention.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm just going to queue up my slides here. All right. All right. Let me make sure, let me hide my floating meeting controls. Everyone, everything seems okay? All right. So I will talk, thank you, about this. And we have just 20 minutes. And so, as you know, this is what I've been working on since, I guess, 1995. Not all of it in Michigan, but I've been in Michigan since the fall of 2003. And I've seen how the Lyme disease tick, as well as disease, has been spreading throughout Michigan over the last 20 years or so. What I'm going to do today is provide a little background on exactly what was just queued up, but I will preface to say I am not a human physician, a human doctor, and I'm not also a veterinary doctor either, although I'm also in the Department of Large Animal Clinical Sciences. But I will be able to tell you a bit of what is Lyme disease and how it's diagnosed and how to prevent it, and I'll tell a little bit about what's happened in Michigan. So, Lyme disease is the leading vector-borne disease in North America, actually in Europe as well. And most of Lyme disease occurs in the eastern U.S. There's also a focus out in in the California, Oregon area, but 95% of the cases are here in the Northeast and Upper Midwest. It's a multisystemic inflammatory disease. The spirochete, the bacterium that causes Lyme disease, does not actually have any like virulence factors or anything like that, but yet it's our body's immune system fighting it that causes so much disease. And here in our area, the main pathogen that causes Lyme disease is Borrelia burgdorferi, sitza stricto, which mostly we will just call Borrelia burgdorferi. And then Borrelia mayonii, as you can potentially tell from the root name Mayo, that was recently discovered in the last 5-7 years, but it mostly has been just in the upper Midwest. And I think maybe it's been detected once or twice in ticks here in Michigan. But I think most of the cases are caused by Borrelia burgdorferi. This pathogen, this spirochetal bacteria, is transmitted by the bite of Ixodes scapularis, which is the black-legged, or you might know of it as the deer tick. It's often called that. And then I did want to make a note that some of you may know about another spirochete, Borrelia miyamotoi. That's another Borrelia species, but it's not considered a Lyme disease spirochete species. It's in the relapsing fever group, and it's also transmitted by this tick. But its prevalence amongst ticks is so low that about 2% that it doesn't cause as much disease. But it is out there, but it's probably being masked a bit by the Lyme disease bacterium. Which I should say, well, I'll tell you more about that. But a little background is that this tick, it's in this Ixodes ricinus complex. This complex is found in North America as well as Europe, Eurasia. It's a temperate tick, and it is what we call a three-host tick. And so beyond the egg stage, there's a larva stage, a nymph stage, and adult stage. And all life stages need to feed on a host, a blood meal, to be able to either progress to this next life stage, or as a female that you see at the bottom there, that it can get a blood meal and lay eggs. And one of its greatest superpowers is that it feeds on a whole bunch of different host species, which is, I think, quite one of the main reasons why this tick has so easily spread across our landscape, because it's not a picky eater. The only difference is that the adult stage tends to feed on larger hosts, such as the white-tailed deer, but also could be coyotes and such. But given we have no short abundance of deer, that really has let this tick be able to spread. An important thing to know is that the Lyme disease bacterium is passed between these hosts and the ticks, because the tick hatches uninfected, even if the mom's infected. There's no vertical transmission from the mother to the larvae. And so that's why larval ticks are not going to be infectious to us. So we don't have to worry about them as much. But the nymph and the adult, since they've been able to have a chance to feed on infected hosts like mice, chipmunks, and robins, then they can become infected. And then thereby they can infect us if they end up bumping into us rather than one of these natural wildlife hosts. So really, though, then the nymph and the adult female are the most important vectors, because also the male does not tend to feed on humans or dogs. Most of us, they just want to find a female and mate, right? And so these are what we call the two actual vector life stages. And this is the seasonality for the incidence of Lyme disease cases throughout the country. They may vary a little bit as you go north or south, but really June and July are the peak times for Lyme disease, although you can get Lyme disease any time of the year because the adult or the nymphal stage is active, all right? So the adult stage is active now, it's active in the fall, and if it's warm in the winter, it'll be active. But as you can see here, the peak is in the middle of the summer. And so, or I would say late spring, but I have this slide, should have queued up. So this is just, it's showing you throughout the calendar year when these ticks they tend to be active. But as long as it's above 4 degrees Celsius or 30 some degrees Fahrenheit, the adult tick can be host seeking. And my students have been out collecting, I mean, in March and April now, and we just have found our first nymphs this past week as well, even though they typically are not peaking until May and June. But if you can see this and match it with that seasonality of when people are sick, you can then see the nymph stage is the main vector. And that's because it is small. All right, because only 25% of nymphs, 25% of the nymphs are infected when Lyme disease is kind of entrenched in your area. Adult ticks, it's like 50% can be infected, but the males don't bite, so you get rid of half of them. But because of this small size of this nymph, it escapes notice. And so people have often joked, or some have joked because they've put out this great meme showing some of these lemon poppy seed muffins and these everything seed bagels. And I think the people who make these baked goods aren't so happy. But the poppy seed is the size of this nymph, and the sesame or so, the adult female. And the male is similar, a little smaller than the female, and he's black colored fully. And so but the thing is, you notice the female, she's got this red and she's bigger. So you're more apt to see her on you and remove her before she's able to feed or soon after she starts. But this nymph, it's hard to see. Most people who get Lyme disease never see the tick that bites them. So I'll talk more about prevention later. But this is kind of this shows the demography of who gets sick and at what stages. So there's generally two peaks, young people and older people. And males tend to be more infected than females, or who get sick, I should say. And part of this is really due to behavior. And so young kids are outside a lot playing, right? And they'll contact the ticks more. But then they come in and everyone has to work. So when they're teenagers and older, and you're inside and you don't get exposed as much. But then exposure, maybe you're older now, you have some more time to garden and such, hike and things like that. And so there's a peak then later that in terms of numbers of cases. And as we get older, I have noticed I can't see those ticks as well. So all these different factors come into play. This is a figure from the Nature Reviews Disease Primers from 2016, and I would say we can focus on the blue or teal boxes. This shows that for Lyme disease, they're generally considered 3 stages or phases for disease if it's not treated. You have more of the initial phase or acute phase, which can take from days to weeks. And then that's when if you've heard of Lyme disease and heard of a symptom, it would be like the bullseye rash. That is one of the most pathognomonic symptoms and signs, I should say, for this disease. And I'll show some pictures. And you can feel like there's some flu-like symptoms. If untreated, it can progress to the second stage, which is weeks to months, and there can be some neuroborreliosis. And if you've heard about Bell's palsy, where you have one side of your face, the nerves, you might see the face drooping a bit. That's one of the signs. And then you can also have some carditis, some heart block, right? And that can be scary, and that actually can cause death. But it seems that hopefully, for many people who notice they have Lyme disease early on, if they get the antibiotics, then that will help prevent these carditis from becoming more fatal. And so that's a very rare manifestation that is seen, but it probably has gone unnoticed, especially if you think of some of the people going back to the epidemiology. If you're older and you have a heart attack, you may not think Lyme, might be many other reasons, right? So if Lyme disease continues not to be treated, then you can have a whole host of other types of signs and symptoms. But Lyme arthritis, which is also something that people have thought about, associate much with Lyme disease, that's considered more of a late stage manifestation. And what's interesting is that in places like the Northeast, which has had to deal with Lyme disease for so much longer than many other areas, although the Midwest in some areas gives it a run, but they have been seeing less Lyme arthritis, and they attribute that to better outreach and understanding of that this disease both is of, it's a risky disease to get in this time of year and going into the summer. So both from the public standpoint and from the healthcare standpoint, there's greater recognition for both prevention, but also recognition of the symptoms. So here is a poster that the CDC has showing about this bullseye rash, also called erythema migrans, shortened to EM. So the definition it has is that it has to be about 5 centimeters in diameter. And so oftentimes, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if you look at the second row on the right, and also on the bottom, oftentimes the posters show this beautiful bullseye rash. And I don't mean beautiful aesthetically, but it's recognizable as a circular rash in the bottom right of the bullseye. But that is actually typically not what is seen. And so it can be misleading. And so you can see how there can be different manifestations of the rash. The rash occurs where the initial tick bite occurred. And it has something, it's derived from the fact that the spirochete is injected into the area. And then as it swims away through the skin, away from the initial immune response, the innate immune response of the host, it is going further out, but there's the red is from the inflammation, but as it goes further out, it gets more diffuse. And so you see a clearing, a white, except for at the leading edges where you have, again, some of the inflammation. You can get secondary rashes in other places if the spirochete then colonizes another area and sets up the immune reaction. But oftentimes, they say 70% of people will see this rash. Physicians will say, biologically, everyone should have the rash, but there's variation, and it also depends on where the rash occurs. It just may not be seen as well. All right. But this is a PSA to healthcare folks to know that don't look for that typical rash, but know that it should be expanding. So you can also get a little rash, a little response, a hypersensitivity response, just like from a mosquito, when you get a tick bite. And you'll have a little raised area. You might have a raised area. It could be itchy. Typically, these rashes aren't that itchy, but that rash needs to grow because that's what the spirochetes are doing. So if that rash doesn't grow, then it's probably not due to the Lyme disease bacterium. Okay, so the spirochetes, when they enter the host, they are only in the blood for a short while. And therefore, when you're sick and you go see the doctor, there is not a good direct test to be able to find the few spirochetes that are in the blood. Therefore, Lyme disease has always been, first of all, it should be clinically diagnosed. That's, that is probably the main way it should be diagnosed, because the only laboratory tests that we have right now rely on looking for antibodies. And so antibodies take 2 weeks or so to be able to develop to a high enough threshold for detection so that you can have enough of the specific antibodies that would be able to, trigger then for the first and the second test, the Western blot, to say that those antibodies are due to a Lyme infection and not from some other potential infection that there could be cross reactions with. All right. So that's why they say when you're sick, for the most part, there's not, in the acute phase, the antibodies will not probably have risen to past the threshold of detection. And so as long as epidemiologically, it seems like you've been outside, you've probably been in an area where the ticks have been, there is risk in your area for Lyme disease, and you seem to show enough of the suite of the symptoms, especially of a bullseye rash, to say you probably have Lyme disease. At that point, the healthcare provider should just go ahead and treat because the symptoms match. And as long as, again, I'm not a doctor, so those of you who are can know that as long as I guess you can rule out other etiologies. And so these are, this is from the publication of Sterling, also updated Lyme disease primer. But these are, some of the antibiotics that are often used to treat Lyme disease, also in different manifestations for when you have early versus late disease. And then from the older publication, because I had this slide, they also had a list of things that we shouldn't use to treat libreliosis, because they have not had evidence backing that these interventions have improved the outcome. All right. So I can't see the time. So I just can someone let me know how much time?
Yeah, I think you have
left?
a couple more minutes, because I think this slide on sort of what's happened with tick over time is
Okay.
important for us to understand. And I'd be curious if you have any sort of ideas about why. We've talked a little bit about kind of areas that have been developed and that sort of changing the patterns of deer and tick-borne illnesses. But if we
Yes.
could, and I want to make sure Nicole has an opportunity to share
Yes,
her story as well.
exactly. I know. That's why I just wanted, so please, Dr. Edward Jones, please just
I'm
if
happy to
just tell
butt
me
in,
when
no
I'm
worries.
done. Tell me when,
That's
because
fine.
I could go on forever. But I'll say that in Michigan, it's increased over time. Colleagues here had discovered the ticks first in Menominee County, which is the deepest, lowest southern county in the middle of Upper Peninsula, back
Yeah.
then in the late 90s, and then Southwest Michigan in the early 2000s. And as you can see, the number of cases have increased over time. They've creeped, but this slide shows that a lot of this work is from my lab, but also from other local health departments, but has shown where all of a sudden, according to the CDC criteria, you can see that the red counties have expanded. And those are the ones for which we know there are some established tick populations. And where there are established tick populations for this disease, eventually the pathogen is there. And because of what I said before, the ingredients for having this cycle are having deer they don't actually host the pathogen, but you need some big host and an abundant host like the deer to keep the tick population going. But then as long as you have mice and chipmunks and maybe a few birds and such, you're going to have a cycle. So because of that, I mean, the criteria, the bar is pretty low because you can imagine most of Michigan, except for maybe the pure agricultural areas and maybe where you have dense cities, you're always going to have these few requirements. And as long as you have the habitat, and that's how we drag for the sample for the ticks, you drag this cloth across, that if you have more woodland areas that can help promote the survivorship of the tick because they dry out easily, you're going to have these ticks. And so to your point, we already had everything in the landscape, I think, by the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, but probably the tick had to come here, had to get here. And the closest areas that had established tick populations could have been up in the UP, right there in Menominee County, or also in Wisconsin, and then Northwest Indiana. So somehow they creeped into the lower peninsula, probably from there. And then it just took time. These ticks, they don't fly, so they have to move on the backs of these animals. So that's the reason for the spread. And I want to remind people that the risk still is not homogeneous everywhere because the ticks aren't everywhere, but these ticks carry other pathogens too. So that's just another reminder. And so, and these are data from the health department, from ticks and people and such, to show also for anaplasmosis, which is also really rapidly increasing in the past few years. And that's transmitted by this tick, another bacterium, similar life cycle. For prevention, these websites, these sites, the health department for our state, CDC, and Tick Encounter are places where I think have the best information. And there is a vaccine, but the vaccine right now, it's not available yet. It's going to take a little while. And there are also other drugs people have in clinical trials and both of these actually have already work in dogs. And so there's a pill you can give to dogs, maybe that you already do, that could kill ticks. They're looking at that for humans too. And therefore, it's good for not just the Lyme disease tick, but for other ticks that we may encounter. And in Michigan, we have 3 more. So I was going to say, these are the main things that you should do to prevent yourself from getting one of these tick-borne diseases, since we don't have a vaccine yet and we don't have a pill. And so I always think, have your tick first aid kit that has everything you need in it. Have one in your car, have one, at home. But basically, you want to have tweezers, you want to have a bag and such to get these ticks. But first, wear protective clothing, long sleeves, long pants, and have them treated with permethrin if you go out often, because that'll kill the ticks. But on your skin, you want to use one of these EPA registered repellents. Know where ticks are, stay on the trails, check for ticks, remove any, save the ticks, and then use an ID service to look for them. And I'll end with a slide that has information on that. But because we have different ticks and different ticks transmit different pathogens. So
all right, show us your last slide. Thank you so much.
Yes, I was going to say right here, if people want to just take a screenshot,
that would be amazing.
I can send it out. This is what's important. So thanks. All right.
Thank you so much. No, that was so helpful. Nicole Bray, I would love for you to share a little bit about your experience, and thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, of course. I'm happy to be here. So hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nicole Bray, and I'm a PhD student in sociology at Michigan State. So today I'm going to share both my personal experience with Lyme disease and how that connects to broader patterns that we see in delayed diagnosis. What's important about my experience is that I actually had one of the hallmark signs of Lyme disease, which is the erythema migrans rash, the bullseye rash. But it wasn't recognized by my provider at the time. So that was one of the big issues that started it all. And then after that, I lived with symptoms for about 11 years before I was diagnosed. So at the time, I appeared healthy on the outside, but my health was steadily declining. And I experienced things like fatigue, weight loss, memory issues, and sleep disruptions. And these symptoms, they didn't clearly point to specifically one condition, which made it difficult for doctors to take it seriously. So over time, those symptoms became much more severe, and I started to have seizures and constant migraines and struggle. And then I also had severe musculoskeletal pain and muscle stiffness. And then I eventually started to not be able to read or write anymore. So I had to take a leave of absence from undergrad, so I could learn how. I kind of had to teach myself how to read and write again. And uh, you know, my case, in this case, the delay wasn't just about unclear symptoms. It was also about recognition.
Yeah.
And it took years of navigating the healthcare system before Lyme disease was even considered. And what I later realized was my experience wasn't entirely unique. After I was diagnosed, I started looking more deeply into Lyme disease, and I began to engage unintentionally with online Lyme communities because I started sharing research articles that I found interesting, and then, I would go over them and then instantly forget what I would read, and because the memory loss is just really severe. So I wanted to go back to them. So I'd post them on social media and like a separate account for me. And then I didn't realize people were following it. And then I'd post videos about it. And then as soon as I watched it, I couldn't remember what it was about, but I knew it was something I wanted to review again. So I posted there. And then that unintentionally led to me having conversations with hundreds of patients who had a delayed diagnosis and were struggling. And I also had the opportunity to have conversations with providers and family members of people who have Lyme disease. And what stood out to me was how consistent these experiences were, especially around delayed diagnosis and not being taken seriously. So my research now focuses on disparities in diagnosis and access to care, and the inequities that contribute to those disparities. So not just who gets diagnosed later, uh, which primarily is uh, Black communities along with Hispanic and Latino communities. And there's so many different inequities that they face that are huge barriers to getting an actual diagnosis and then treatment. So these inequities contribute to those disparities. So not just who gets diagnosed later, but why those patterns exist and things like access, awareness, and how symptoms are interpreted. So this isn't just about individual experiences. It reflects a broader pattern. So Lyme disease is often underrecognized within healthcare systems. And part of that challenge is that symptoms can overlap with many other conditions, especially after it starts to disseminate throughout the body, which is the later stages of the disease. But another key issue is that provider awareness and training can vary widely, and it doesn't include diverse populations. They're not learning in med school how to recognize Lyme disease in diverse populations, such as on different skin tones, and they're not.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like the Lyme disease bullseye rash is not, I mean, the
It's
people
not a
who
bullseye
notice
in
the
everyone,
rash,
right? Like you
that's
can't, it doesn't look that way.
30%. Yeah, 30% of the rashes are the bullseye rash.
Right.
But then all the other rashes that people recognize are not presenting like that. So that's like a huge issue.
Nicole,
And
can I ask you, how
yeah.
did you get to your diagnosis? Like, how did you finally get to that place where, someone listened to you enough and you were able to develop trust and someone heard you and you were able to get to that diagnosis?
Well, I don't want to discourage anybody, but I honestly, I didn't think I would honestly live very long because I had been dismissed so frequently by my doctor since I was about in third or fourth grade. So it kind of was pushed off. He saw the bullseye rash. He said it was an infected bug bite. And it was a bug bite, and you said the rash would go away eventually, and it does go away, but then it led to symptoms. But over time, it just kept progressing, and when it did, it was dismissed. It was like, oh, you're having fainting spells. Just when you stand up, just sit back down. Or when I'd raise my hand in class, I'd start to black out, and he's like, oh, just put your hand back down. So I kind of just stopped telling him things because it wasn't helpful at all. So I just stopped talking about it. And then I started documenting my symptoms in all my school planners because I had symptoms every day, and I knew I was dying, and I knew it was in my brain at that point, and right before high school, and he told me it wasn't brain cancer, so I was fine. And that's when I knew. I was like, it's going to take something big for the diagnosis to happen. And then I experienced more severe symptoms. I was getting grand mal seizures and later in high school. And then I was sent to a specialist in epilepsy. And they said it wasn't epilepsy yet, but it could develop into epilepsy. But I knew it was something bigger than that. And that's one of the common themes I saw with other patients who had late stage Lyme, that they said that, I haven't really admitted it to anyone else, but I feel like I'm dying. I have this overwhelming feeling that I am dying. And I had that too.
Yeah.
And then eventually, after I got to college, I didn't expect to live to get to college. I just kind of kept quiet about it with everybody. I didn't want anyone to know I was going through things because it was really traumatic going to a doctor and not getting not having them believe me or pushing it off as oh, a lot of women your age struggle with weight, or you just need to stand up slower, or maybe you're stressed. But I wasn't sleeping for 4 days straight. So it was on a consistent basis, and nothing worked. So eventually I got to my junior year of undergrad, and because I wanted to graduate before I told anyone I was as sick as I was, but I couldn't remember where I lived. I mean, I didn't know what year it was. I would get lost going to class. I was driving there, and I would call my mom and say, I don't know where I'm going. And then when I'd get out of class, I would call my mom and say, I don't know where I'm at, and I don't know how I got here. And she was freaked out. And I had a professor, Dr. Taylor at MSU, who was my professor at the time, and he would stay after class, and he would grab the phone from me and talk to my mom and say, don't worry, I'll make sure your daughter gets to where she needs to be. But I had no idea how I even got there. And apparently I was driving my car to class, and I had no idea. But I got home, and at that point, when I started, I thought I slept for 3 days straight, but my other professor was like, I knew you didn't feel well, but you were participating and I appreciate that. And I had gone up to her to ask her for notes because I thought I would missed the class. But I had been going to class and driving there and I had no idea. And then I'd go to the grocery store and I had no idea I did that. And that's when I decided it was time to go home and get help because I didn't. It's one thing to put your own life in danger, but it's another to put other people's lives in danger. So at that point, my roommates actually called my parents and said, you need to pick up Nicole, and because she's not doing good. She needs. So my parents picked me up and took me to a doctor that we knew, and he gave me a proper physical, and he's like, something is extremely wrong. And that was the first time I was listened to. And yeah, it was nice to be listened to, but at that point I was so far gone, I couldn't really form like sentences, and it was difficult, but it was nice to have somebody to listen to me for once. But
Nicole, can I thank you for your courage for being willing to, one, share your story, and two, tell your story to other people who I know have felt similarly in some way, right? You have used your story to develop research and think about the inequities that exist in Lyme disease and exist in treatment. And you've described an experience that is true of many people in Flint and other communities who may not have been listened to or may not have been sufficiently heard. I want to honor the fact, I want to spend more time, and I would love if you'd come back and talk to us a little bit more about your research, because I think we need to spend time delving into the work that you do to really honor what is the experience of many people in underserved communities, as you described. Appreciate you so much being willing to share your story, and thank you again to Dr. Sau for giving some context to the data and the work behind that. But Nicole, we're bringing you back to the webinar because the work you do is so important, and we appreciate so much your willingness to share and then tell your story and be a leader to others. So thank you.
And I have so much more I can share with everybody, and I'm happy to help. And, I don't want people to have to suffer like I did. I don't think it's necessary. And I think it's such a big issue, especially in just in more diverse communities. And I mean, I was privileged enough to have my parents there to support me and drive me to treatments and to be able to afford to do those things and have a connection with doctors who could communicate with each other and then find the doctor that saved my life. So Dr. Markowitz was my Lyme specialist, and he wasn't going to give up on me. And he told me that from the beginning. And that's what, I mean, I really didn't, I was just going with it because I didn't think it would work, but it worked. But also that support system isn't always there for everybody. And that's what concerned me so much. After I got better, I just thought about all those things, and health, health insurance, and having transportation, and all those things. It's really, yeah, there's a lot to it. But yeah, I would love to come back and share more about this experience, how things
Oh my gosh.
So
I mean, the work you're doing is just so important, and the ability to share that story, make sure people understand. And I appreciate even the example of and it's not just with Lyme disease, but it is with many sort of illnesses that might present differently or may require a little bit, that are clinical diagnoses that don't necessarily have a test that you can do and might present a little differently, may be a little bit off the beaten path. And I think your description that it's something we need to make sure we're being thoughtful about how we teach in medical schools and teach our budding training physicians is something I really took to heart.
And I also want to mention that when I found the research about the numbers of people who were getting diagnosed with Lyme disease, I knew something was off, because at the time it said it was 89% of people who 89% of people with Lyme disease were white, and then 95 non-Hispanic. And that's where that's where I just, it didn't make sense to me that that was the case. And then I dove deeper into that, and I found like those who were not in that those populations, they were getting the later stages, like they were getting diagnosed in the disseminated phases of the Lyme disease, and that's where it's going to stick. It can cause permanent damage to the body, but it can also cause lingering symptoms, and it was so shocking to me. But I also had the chance to share my research with my Lyme specialist, and it was nice that he was receptive to it and
Yeah.
actually looked at that, and he's like, that aligns with with my patients, the demographics of my patients. And he's like, do you mind if I look into that research too? And I think it's so important to communicate that to providers, because even if not all of them are willing to do that, there are some, and it's worth like trying to do it, and like being able to talk about that kind of research and having a provider that does want to serve everybody. I know not all of them do, but the one I went to, he was willing to talk about it with me, and he like taught me so much about the bacteria that causes it. And it's just such an intelligent bacteria that it's just causes so many interesting manifestations. And I know that we're running short on time, so I won't go over the rest of my stuff. So
That's all right. That's all right.
Yeah.
It really was such a wonderful webinar, you guys. I can't say this enough. We want to bring all of you back. Again, I can see EJ's gears are turning right now. That's usually her look of like arms folded, sit back and like watch. So I will let
I'm thinking about it so much.
Yes, absolutely. We were able to share some of the resources, but maybe as the summer progresses, we can have you come in, come back and maybe do a check-in with, trends that you're seeing in Lyme disease. Jean, we didn't
It'd
even
be good to do it with the health department is what I was kind of thinking, is like bring the health
yes.
department back so we have local data, and then we can
Yep.
have this sort of updated conversation.
Yep. Do you still have your app, Jean?
We do. And that was the bullseye, the orange one. So you can look that up. Yeah.
So we'll make sure that
Right. And
I do want, oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, go ahead.
I do want to mention that I am actually currently working with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and I should be able to have some data at some point. So I did want to mention that, because I got to speak with them, and the way they go about treating, or the way communities treat in Michigan, like different communities, how they go about like targeting Lyme disease and helping people treat it is some of them are problematic. And then also there's also a lot of good things happening, but there also are different, like surprising things that I found too. But we're going to be doing more research on that to see what we find. But it's a big issue in Michigan, because for the past 5 years, it's surged. Like new Lyme cases have surged 168%. So there's been 168% surge in the past 5 years in Michigan alone. So it's just
Do either you, Dr. Sauer, Nicole, I have wondered if some of this is a result of overdevelopment, right? Like if you think about tick population in woody areas and this development of communities, we keep kind of developing woody areas, developing communities, and deer have no place to go, right? And so I'm just
to your point, actually, so actually last week and the week before, we did similar talks, but to natural resource people, deer folks, gardeners, but the suburban landscape.
in the suburbs,
actually, it's not just driving the deer away. It's that these are increasing the numbers of deer, and we are not making just concrete jungles, right? We want to have woodlots nearby. We want to have, so student and I actually started to do work in Detroit, because we work with the city health department there a bit. And so we actually discovered, she did some ticks in that, I think it's Palmer Woods. That's
what it is.
Right, but you look at the landscape, there's like cemeteries not too far north and out. So there's like a network. We ended up not working there, but part of the reason for wanting to work there was to work in a different community with different risks and such. But because it ended up that, at least when we started, there weren't that many cases of Lyme or ticks, I should say. And so for a PhD student, then we needed to work somewhere where there were ticks, but it's something that we'd like to come back to. And I was going to say that in part, that's why I was really happy with, Heatherlyn invited me to be here to try to open the conversation to talk about reaching, other communities where these ticks are coming into that maybe we should be, try to be more proactive about.
Artina, you're calling our winters mild?
Yeah, no, it's true. She's right.
I know. I'm like, that was not my experience this year.
I know, not this year or the polar vortex, but between those waves.
So this is the first winter that we've had a really serious Michigan winter with temperatures freezing and they're staying cold and all that kind of stuff. When it's warm, you are going to have more ticks. I work at a park system, just so y'all know.
Yeah, well,
so you're going to have more ticks, you're going to have more deer, you're going to have more of everything you don't want. So when you see these beautiful, terrible, freezing cold winters, enjoy them because they're going to help you a lot come spring and summer.
So wait, so when we do this again, Artina, I would love for you to be there and say that in part because I think this idea of like people want to hear things from the people they know, right?
Yeah,
and you talking about your expertise from that standpoint, having this collaborative conversation amongst our experts and Nicole being someone who's experienced it.
Yeah.
And again, I can't underscore enough, and I gotta leave in a second, but I can't underscore enough my appreciation for you being willing to share the story of not being listened to and not being heard, because to put Lyme disease to the right just a little bit, that is people's experience about many things. Right. That can be people's experience about many things. And so I think people can understand that, unfortunately. And it's not an easy thing to explain to a bunch of people and describe. So I appreciate your courage and your willingness to be with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, it is still a problem. Like I have a hard time trusting doctors still now just because it was so traumatizing. And I trusted my Lyme specialist because I had known him for 10 years after he treated me. And he played a pivotal role in me surviving. And he listened to me, and then he had actually passed away on September 5th of 2024. And I've avoided doctors ever since then because I get panic attacks because I'm terrified of what they're going to tell me or what they're going to say to me, because it was just it was a very difficult process to go through the medical system and like being told like it's nothing, or a lot of women your age suffer with stress and like or eating disorders. And I was like, I don't know why I'm losing weight though. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't remember where I live. I don't know what year it is. I can't spell my name. I don't know when I was born. And it was like all these things. And I was like repeating myself and like hiding things from myself, and I had no memory of it. And it was just like trying to push through to get my degree because I was like, this is what matters. Okay, this is what I need. Education is first and then health. But like because obviously shouldn't be the priority. But I was afraid that once I started treatment, I wouldn't get better or I wouldn't be able to return to school. But I really emphasized that to my Lyme specialist that like if we're going to do the treatment, and I'm going to get better. Getting better for me is not being taken care of by my parents for the rest of my life. It's getting back to school and getting an education, because that's what I want. And I want to be able to do something with what I've gone through so I can help somebody else, because it was an extremely isolating experience, because at the time I didn't know anybody with Lyme disease. So we were navigating it a lot. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea what treatment was best. But like throughout, like, there were some treatments that people do, and we did it for a while, but it was also very costly. And then my Lyme specialist, when we started going to him, he he was like, you don't need to do the hyperbaric oxygen chamber treatment. Because I was doing it twice a day, every single day. And it was like, that's not necessary. And it was so expensive, but like, there were so many like avenues we had to take, and they just did not know what was going on. And then
Yeah.
the Lyme disease is like, it does get worse before it gets better with treatment. And a lot of patients don't understand
that.
So they'll
We
stop.
should create a little, I'm gonna go, but we should create a list of those things and like the things we need to make sure people know about. And
Yep.
we'll come together. HU, I know we gotta close out the webinar, but
Oh, we already
thank you
did.
so much.
Like
okay.
yeah, we had. I think
No,
we're
I
still,
saw. I know you closed out the webinar, but I
Yeah,
wanted to give the
I
other
think we're
people the
still
permission to go. But
Yeah, we're still streaming to YouTube. Blair's going to reach out to each of the panelists in case you're interested in sharing. Oh, she went. In case you're interested in sharing a quote. So she'll
Okay.
be in the next couple of weeks because we do share that with our social media profiles so that we can drive folks back to the webinar just in case they missed it, because this is such valuable information. Oh, look at her. She's like, yep, she's going to talk to you all soon. All right. Oh, she needs to be crowned. All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you,
Later.
Nicole.
Thanks
Love
for
to
the
be